You, me, and the unfinished tea. Old books and the first rain. That evening in Lahore was unlike any other. The suffocating late May heat had suddenly been swept away by a cool, refreshing breeze. Gray clouds claimed the sky, and looking out from the tall glass windows of the historic library on Mall Road, it felt as though the entire city was drawing a deep, collective breath. Haroon was busy organizing the scattered pages of his PhD thesis on a large wooden table. He was a serious, soft-spoken 26-year-old who lived in the world of literature. For him, life had a simple, predictable rhythm: wake up early, teach Urdu literature at a local college, and spend his evenings buried deep within history and philosophy books in a quiet corner of this ancient library. He detested noise and cherished silence. If the downpour starts, getting back to the hostel will be a nightmare, he muttered to himself, checking his watch. As he was pulling the zipper of his bag, the heavy wooden door of the library creaked open. A young woman rushed in. She held a large sketchbook close to her chest, and the corner of her dupatta was damp from the rain that had just begun to fall outside. Her face carried a mix of panic and innocence, looking very much like someone who had just escaped a storm to find a safe haven. That was Aiza. Aiza was the absolute polar opposite of Haroon. She was a final-year fine arts student at the National College of Arts NCA, vibrant, full of dreams, and driven by raw emotion. To her, life was a blank canvas waiting to be splashed with bold, beautiful colors at every turn. Oh my God, thank goodness I made it in time, or my entire sketchbook would have been ruined, Aiza gasped, her voice echoing a bit too loudly in the pin-drop silence of the library. The elderly librarian, Rahman Sahib, lowered his glasses and glared at her over the rim, a clear, universal signal meaning, silence please. Aiza bit her lip in embarrassment and nodded apologetically. She looked around for a place to sit. The library wasn't crowded, but by some stroke of fate, the only vacant spot left was at Haroon's table. She walked over with quiet steps and stood by his desk. May I sit here? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Haroon looked up. His deep, serious eyes met Aiza's lively, sparkling gaze. Without saying a word, he nodded politely and slid his papers further to one side to make room for her. Aiza sat down, immediately opened her sketchbook, and began drawing lines with a pencil. Outside, the rain had intensified into a heavy downpour. The rhythmic drumming of raindrops against the glass window created a mesmerizing, serene atmosphere inside. Haroon abandoned his plan to leave, realizing the weather was too harsh. He picked up a book, pretending to read, but his attention kept drifting back to Aiza. She was so deeply absorbed in her work, it seemed as if nothing else existed in the universe except her and her canvas. Suddenly, the tip of Aiza's pencil snapped. She rummaged through her bag, looking for a sharpener, but found nothing. Sighing softly, she turned to Haroon with a hint of hesitation. Excuse me, do you happen to have a sharpener or a paper cutter? Haroon looked at her, then reached into his geometry box, pulled out a small utility cutter, and silently handed it to her. Thank you, Aiza said, flashing a bright smile. Her smile possessed a freshness that seemed to breathe new life into the dusty, old library atmosphere. Haroon felt his heart skip a beat. For a man who usually shied away from talking to women, he felt surprisingly at peace. As Aiza handed the cutter back, her fingers brushed lightly against his. It was a fraction of a second, but it sent a quiet jolt through both of them. What are you writing? Aiza asked, curiously, nodding toward the Urdu manuscripts scattered on his desk. I am doing research on Urdu literature. Specifically on the poetry of Mir Taqi Mir and the socio-political conditions of his era, Haroon replied, adjusting his glasses. Wow, Mir Taqi Mir. Aiza smiled and recited a famous couplet with dramatic flair. Greater than, ibtada-e ishq hai rota hai kya. Greater than aage dekiye hota hai kya. Asterisk. Greater than it is just the beginning of love, why do you cry? Asterisk. Greater than just wait and see what happens as we go on. Asterisk. Greater than. A faint smile appeared on Haroon's lips. Do you have an interest in poetry? Not a formal one, Aiza said, looking out the window. But anything that is beautiful touches my heart. Like colors, like this rain, and like certain words. By the way, I'm Aiza. And I am Haroon, he replied. The heavy downpour eventually dwindled into a soft drizzle, but the conversation that had sparked between the two refused to stop. They belonged to entirely different worlds, but perhaps that was exactly why they found each other so magnetic. Evenings, tea, and unfinished sketches. A week had passed since that first meeting. Harun tried his best not to think about Asa, but whenever he sat in the library, his eyes involuntarily darted toward the entrance. He lied to himself that he was purely focusing on his research, but his heart knew better. On the other side of town, new shades were emerging on Asa's canvas. She had drawn a sketch in her book, a young man sitting by a window, reading a book, carrying the exact same intense seriousness that belonged to Harun. On a Thursday evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Harun left the library and walked toward a historic tea house on Mall Road. He loved the strong, traditional cardamom tea served there. When he walked in, the place was bustling with its usual clamor, the clinking of spoons, loud laughter, and ripples of cigarette smoke. Harun took a seat at a corner table and ordered his tea. Just as his cup arrived, he heard a familiar, musical laugh. He turned around. Asa was sitting a few tables away with two of her university friends. She looked radiant, gesturing animatedly as she shared a story. Harun thought he should leave to avoid intruding on her personal space. But before he could stand up, Asa's eyes locked onto his. Her face instantly lit up. Saying a quick word to her friends, she grabbed her bag and walked straight over to Harun's table. "Harun, you're here," she said, sitting on the chair opposite him without waiting for an invitation. "Yes, I come here quite often for evening tea," Harun said, straightening his posture. "Isn't it strange?" Asa said, resting her chin on her hands. "We live in the same city, probably crossed the same paths 100 times, but we were total strangers until we met in that library." "The city is vast, Asa, and human beings are inherently lonely," Harun remarked philosophically. "HMPH, why are you always so serious? Have you ever just lived life freely?" Asa teased him. Just then, the waiter brought another cup of tea. Harun gently slid it toward Asa. "The tea here is very special. Try it, maybe you'll understand the secret behind my seriousness," Harun joked softly. Asa took her first sip and closed her eyes in delight. Amazing. The aroma of cardamom is perfect." As the evening wore on, their conversation deepened. Asa shared that her mother had passed away when she was a little girl, and she had been raised by her father. She loved him dearly, but he was always consumed by his massive business empire. To cope with the resulting loneliness, she had turned to colors. Harun shared his own story, explaining that he came from a modest, middle-class family living in a distant village. He was staying at a hostel in Lahore, fighting hard to turn his academic dreams into reality. "You know, Harun," Asa said, staring into her teacup, "I feel like we are both lonely in our own ways. The only difference is that I use colors to hide my loneliness, and you use words." Harun looked at her. In that moment, he saw a shadow of deep melancholy hiding behind her otherwise bubbly demeanor. A fierce protective instinct rose within him, a sudden, profound desire to wipe away all the sad shades from this girl's life and fill it with nothing but joy. "If colors and words unite, Asa, they create a complete picture," Harun said in a low, steady voice. Asa looked up, startled. Under the dim, warm light of the tea house bulbs, their eyes met again. This time, it wasn't just recognition. It was an unspoken emotion that neither was ready to label as love just yet, but it had already taken deep root in their souls. The tea was finished, but neither wanted to leave. The final drops dried at the bottom of their cups, mirroring the way the loneliness in their hearts was beginning to evaporate. Silent confessions and rose-tinted shorter days. As June arrived, the scorching Lahore summer reached its peak, but for Harun and Asa, the weather felt like a perpetual spring. Their meetings were no longer accidental. The old library on Mall Road and the ancient, towering trees of Lawrence Garden, Bag Jinnah became silent witnesses to their growing bond. One evening, as the last golden rays of the sun filtered through the leaves, creating intricate patterns on the ground, they sat on a secluded bench in the garden. Asa held her sketchbook, while Harun held a volume of Urdu poetry. "Harun, sometimes I feel afraid," Asa suddenly said, breaking her gaze from the canvas to look at the vast greenery ahead. "Afraid of what, Asa?" Harun asked, closing his book. His voice held its characteristic calmness and deep concern. "Of the absolute peace I feel when I'm next to you." Asa turned to look directly into his eyes. "My life has always been like a fast-moving train. Colors changed, people came and went, but there was no one who could read my silences. Now, when I go back to the hostel, the walls seem to echo your words. I'm afraid that if time stands still like this, how will I ever move forward?" Harun took a deep breath. He could feel the innocent vulnerability in her voice. He had never held anyone's hand before, but guided by a profound instinct, he reached out and placed his right hand over Aza's trembling fingers. Aza gasped softly, looking at their hands, then up at Harun. The warmth and security in his touch melted away her fears in an instant. Aza, time never stands still, but certain feelings transcend time altogether, Harun said softly. I am a simple man. I don't have grand luxuries or palaces to offer you, but I can promise you this, whenever you look back, you will find me standing right there. Your colors will always have the companionship of my words. It wasn't a traditional, dramatic proposal, nor was the word, love, shouted out loud. Yet, it was a silent, sacred covenant signed in the depths of their hearts. The corners of Aza's eyes grew misty, but a smile spread across her lips, a smile more beautiful than any masterpiece she could ever paint. That evening at the tea house, the tea tasted sweeter than ever before. They were no longer just two individuals, they had become reflections of one another. The fog of distance and the first trial. When love begins to find its path, life often introduces unexpected hurdles. Aza's final year exams and her thesis art exhibition were fast approaching, leaving her incredibly busy. On the other hand, Harun had to travel to Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad for 2 weeks to gather rare archives for his PhD thesis. It's only 2 weeks, Harun, but it feels like 2 centuries, Aza said, standing on the bustling platform of the Lahore railway station. The train was scheduled to leave in a few minutes. Focus on your exhibition, Aza. This is for your future. The moment I finish my work, I'll be right back, Harun reassured her, though his own heart felt heavy. The crowning jewel of my exhibition is the portrait I made of you, Aza smiled softly. I want you to be there when the curtain rises. I will be there, no matter what happens, Harun promised. Harun left for Islamabad, and Aza immersed herself in her world of paints in Lahore. They spoke on the phone at night, but the warmth of sitting across from each other over a cup of tea was sorely missing. Harun spent his days in archives and his nights staring at the ceiling, missing her terribly. But their true trial was just beginning. Aza's father, Sikandar Sahib, a powerful and influential tycoon, returned to Lahore unexpectedly from a long international business tour. He loved Aza, but his worldview was strictly dictated by money, status, and corporate alliances. Without consulting her, he had decided to arrange her marriage to Daniel, the son of his wealthiest business partner, who had recently returned from the United States with an Ivy League degree. One evening, while they were sitting at the grand dining table, Sikandar Sahib set his mug down and spoke authoritatively. Aza Beta, your studies are concluding. I have made a magnificent decision for your future. Daniel and his family are attending your art exhibition next week. We will formally announce your engagement there. Aza's spoon clattered against her plate, the sharp sound echoing through the dining room. The color drained from her face. But Papa, without even asking me. Aza's voice shook. I know what is best for you, Aza. Daniel belongs to an elite family, he will provide you with a life of luxury. Politically and financially, this merger is brilliant for our family business. Sikandar Sahib's tone was final, leaving no room for negotiation. Aza ran to her room, locked the door, and broke down into tears. She desperately dialed Harun's number, but fate was unkind. A severe storm in Islamabad had knocked out the cellular networks, and Harun's phone was completely unreachable. She was entirely alone as the night grew darker, facing a storm that threatened to build an insurmountable wall between her and Harun. She looked at her canvas, where Harun's portrait stood unfinished, resembling the abandoned teacups of their past. The silence before the storm. The Alhambra Art Gallery in Lahore was bathed in brilliant lights that evening, but inside Aza, a heavy darkness loomed. It was the premiere of her first major art exhibition, the day she had spent years dreaming of, yet her face lacked any trace of joy. Dressed in a pristine white silk gown, she stood like a beautiful marble statue greeting high-profile guests, but her eyes were fixed entirely on the main entrance. Harun, where are you? Her heart cried out silently. Sikandar Sahib moved through the crowd with corporate charm, flanked by Daniel and his wealthy parents. Daniel, dressed in an immaculate, expensive designer suit, tried to engage Aza in conversation, but she merely offered polite, hollow nods. Aza, your work is absolutely breathtaking, Daniel's father praised, patting Sikandar Sahib's shoulder. We are thrilled that Aza will soon be the pride of our home. Sikandar, when are we making the announcement? Just a few moments, once the media and VIP guests are fully gathered. We will cut the cake and share the glorious news, Sikandar Sahib announced proudly. Aza's heart sank. She had dialed Haroon's number dozens of times from her clutch bag, only to hear the same cold automated response, "The number you are trying to reach is powered off." She had no way of knowing that the train from Islamabad to Lahore had been delayed for hours due to a track accident, and Haroon's phone battery had completely died. Overwhelmed, she walked away toward a quiet, cordoned-off corner of the gallery where her absolute masterpiece was kept hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. This was the painting she was meant to unveil herself. Behind that curtain lay the vivid manifestation of Haroon, the man who had etched himself onto her soul since that first rainy evening. Suddenly, a loud announcement echoed through the gallery. Sikandar Sahib took the microphone, gathering everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, today is an incredibly proud moment for my daughter Aiza. On this auspicious occasion, I wish to share another beautiful milestone regarding her life." A single tear escaped Aiza's eye and rolled down her cheek. She closed her eyes, wishing she could vanish. Just as her father was about to pronounce Daniel's name, a commotion erupted at the main entrance of the gallery. A young man entered. His clothes were covered in the dust of a long, frantic journey, his hair was disheveled, and he was breathing heavily. It was Haroon. He had run all the way from the railway station. In his pocket, he still carried the small utility cutter from their very first encounter. The moment Aiza opened her eyes, her gaze locked onto him. In an instant, the chatter of the crowd, the flashing lights, and the applause faded into oblivion. In that massive room, only the two of them existed. Truth upon the canvas. Seeing Haroon's disheveled state, the gallery security guards rushed to intercept him. But Aiza's voice rang clear across the hall. "Stop. He is my guest." The entire room turned to look at Haroon. Infuriated by the disruption, Sikandar Sahib's face darkened, while Daniel looked at this ordinary, middle-class intruder with a mixture of amusement and disdain. Ignoring the whispers, Haroon walked forward, his steady gaze locked onto Aiza. "I am so sorry, Aiza. The train, I got delayed," Haroon said, standing before her. His voice carried the exhaustion of the journey, but his eyes held that same profound calm that had always been her anchor. "You made it, Haroon. That is all that matters," Aiza said, a radiant smile breaking through her tears like spring blooming after a harsh winter. Sikandar Sahib marched over, his voice a furious whisper to avoid a public scene in front of the press. "Aiza, what is the meaning of this? Who is this vagrant, and why have you invited him to an event of this stature?" "Papa, this is Haroon," Aiza said, discovering a newfound strength within herself, fueled entirely by Haroon's presence. "He is the man whose words gave life to my colors. He is the man I love." A suffocating silence fell over the gallery. Daniel's parents looked at Sikandar Sahib, whose face was now flushed with rage. "Aiza, have you lost your mind?" Sikandar Sahib raised his voice. "You are rejecting a historic alliance for a penniless, ordinary school teacher with no social standing or future. You are making a mockery of me." Haroon took a step forward, standing respectfully yet firmly before the tycoon. "Sir, I know that in your world, I have no value. I am a teacher, a man of books and quiet libraries. I do not possess Daniel's wealth or empire. But I possess something no one else can give Aiza. I understand her soul. I speak the language of her silence. Enough of your pathetic poetry." Sikandar Sahib snapped, grabbing Aiza's wrist to pull her away. "You are coming home with me right now. This engagement will happen today." "No, Papa." Aiza pulled her hand back forcefully and stood firmly next to the velvet-curtained easel. "Today is a celebration of my art, isn't it? Then let the world see my true masterpiece first, so you may finally understand where your daughter's heart belongs." With a swift, decisive motion, she pulled down the velvet curtain. Gasps echoed through the gallery. On the canvas was a painting of staggering beauty, an old library window, rain pouring outside, and a young man sitting at a table reading a book. He appeared slightly unfinished, but in his hand was a cup of tea, and the steam rising from it beautifully transformed into vibrant colors that gently wrapped around the silhouette of Aiza herself. At the bottom of the painting, Aiza had calligraphed a quote written by Haroon. "Greater than, if colors and words unite, Aiza, they create a complete picture." Asterisk. Greater than. Camera flashes erupted as journalists and art critics began applauding, deeply moved by the raw honesty and genius of the piece. Daniel stared at the painting, then looked into Aiza's eyes, seeing a fierce, unbreakable devotion for Haroon. He realized he had already lost a battle he was never a part of. "Sikandar uncle," Daniel stepped forward, breaking the tension. "Where a heart already belongs to someone else, forced alliances are meaningless. Aiza can be a wonderful friend, but her life's canvas has already been masterfully completed by someone else. He signaled his parents, and they gracefully walked out of the gallery. Sikandar Sahib stood frozen, his immense corporate pride shattered in front of the elite society by the undeniable truth of his daughter's art. Without uttering another word, he turned and exited the hall. The gallery echoed with thunderous applause, but Harun and Asa simply stood before each other in quiet reverence. Their love had won its first major battle. The path of sun and shadows. The grand echo of the Alhambra Art Gallery faded, but that evening marked the beginning of a challenging chapter for Harun and Asa. Sikandar Sahib did not cast Asa out of his house, but his absolute silence and emotional coldness weighed heavily on her heart. He allowed her to live under his roof but refused to speak to her. To him, the departure of Daniel and Asa's choice of an ordinary professor was a deep wound to his ego. On the other hand, Harun did not waver. He successfully defended his PhD thesis and was officially appointed as a permanent assistant professor at a prestigious university. He was no longer just a struggling scholar, he was a self-made, independent man who had earned a respectable position through sheer hard work. Harun, Papa's silence is breaking me from the inside, Asa confessed sadly one Sunday morning as they sat on their usual bench at Lawrence Garden. This time, instead of a sketchbook, she held 2 disposable cups of tea. Harun took his cup and looked at her tenderly. I understand, Asa, it is never easy for a father to accept a choice that completely defies his grand expectations. But we haven't sinned, our love is pure and honest, and truth requires patience to be understood. But he refuses to even see you, Asa sighed, taking a sip. I've tried so hard to tell him about your achievements, your hard work, but the moment your name comes up, he walks away. Harun smiled, his face reflecting that familiar, comforting certainty. Then we don't need to force him. We will win his heart through our integrity and actions. Asa, when a father witnesses his daughter truly happy, cherished, and secure, his anger cannot survive for long. Meanwhile, Asa's artwork began receiving immense critical acclaim across Lahore's elite art circles. Several prominent galleries offered to purchase her collection. With her very first major earnings, she bought a beautiful, classic fountain pen for Harun, engraving it with the words, "To my words, from your colors." Asterisk. When she presented it to him, Harun's eyes filled with immense pride. From this day forth, every word written by this pen will be an ode to you, he promised, holding her hand. Their love was no longer just a collection of romantic ideals, they had become the bedrock of each other's careers and lives. Yet, without her father's blessing, their joy remained incomplete, like a cup of tea that had been brewed perfectly but lacked its essential aroma. The melting of pride. October brought a crisp, cool autumn breeze to Lahore. Sikandar Sahib's health had been deteriorating over the past few weeks, but his relentless corporate schedule and deep-seated emotional stress left him no time to rest. One evening, while reviewing financial portfolios in his home study, a sharp, crushing pain seized his chest. Gasping for air, he collapsed into his armchair. Fortunately, his house help entered to serve water and immediately screamed for Asa. Panicked and weeping, the first person Asa called was Harun. Harun, Papa, something happened to Papa, he collapsed and he's not breathing properly. She cried hysterically. Asa, take a deep breath and stay strong. I am coming with an ambulance right now, Harun commanded, his voice sharp and focused. Within minutes, Harun arrived at the estate alongside an emergency medical team. He personally helped lift Sikandar Sahib onto the stretcher and accompanied a terrified Asa in the ambulance. Upon reaching the hospital, the doctors confirmed that Sikandar Sahib had suffered a mild myocardial infarction, heart attack, and needed to be admitted to the intensive care unit (ICU) immediately. That night was a grueling test of endurance. Asa was a complete wreck, crying uncontrollably at the sight of her father hooked up to machines. Harun stepped up as a true life partner, handling every single responsibility. From managing the hospital's bureaucratic paperwork and arranging specialized medications to constantly communicating with the cardiologists, he coordinated everything flawlessly, as if he were Sikandar Sahib's own son. At 4 in the morning, the lead doctor stepped out of the ICU, wiping his brow. He is out of danger. Thank God you brought him in on time, a delay of even 15 minutes could have been fatal. He is conscious now, and you may see him. Asa rushed inside the sterile room. Sikandar Sahib lay on the bed, pale and frail, but his eyes were open. He looked at his daughter and weakly placed a hand on her head. Papa, you're okay, right? I was so scared, Asa wept, resting her cheek against his hand. Sikandar Sahib asked in a raspy, weak voice, who else is outside? Did any of my board directors or partners come? Asa lowered her head, her voice trembling. No, I called everyone last night, but they all said they would come during visiting hours in the morning. The only person who stood by me through the entire night was Harun. He took care of everything. Sikandar Sahib fell silent. He looked through the glass window of the ICU, seeing Harun sitting alone on a hard corridor bench. His eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, yet his face bore an undeniable look of relief upon hearing that Aiza's father was safe. 2 days later, when Sikandar Sahib was shifted to a private room, he looked at Aiza and said, "Call Harun inside." Harun entered hesitantly, greeting him with his customary respect. "Sir, how are you feeling now?" Sikandar Sahib stared at Harun for a long time. The arrogant, cold pride that usually defined his eyes was gone, replaced by a profound humility and regret. "Harun," Sikandar Sahib spoke, adjusting himself on the pillows. "My entire life, I believed that money and status were the only shields capable of protecting my daughter. I thought men like Daniel were the only ones who mattered. But the night I stared death in the face, all my wealthy friends and corporate allies were nowhere to be found. The only man standing guard over my family was the one I insulted. Sir, please don't apologize. You are Aiza's father, and it was my duty," Harun tried to say, but Sikandar Sahib raised a weak hand, stopping him. "Let me finish, son. I saw Aiza's painting that evening, but my arrogance blinded me to its truth. I finally understand why she chose you. You possess a rare, pure heart, which is worth far more than any empire I have built. I proudly accept your relationship," Sikandar Sahib said, extending his hand toward Harun. Deeply moved, Harun took the older man's hand in a firm grasp. Aiza burst into tears once again, but this time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. The unfinished canvas of their love was finally getting its complete palette. The echo of wedding bells. Following Sikandar Sahib's recovery and discharge from the hospital, life returned to the estate with a newfound vibrance. The suffocating silence of the past was replaced by the beautiful anticipation of a new beginning. Keeping his word, Sikandar Sahib personally invited Harun's parents from their village to Lahore to finalize the wedding arrangements. Harun's parents, simple and incredibly humble folks, were initially intimidated by the tycoon's grand lifestyle. However, Sikandar Sahib shattered all barriers by welcoming them with the warmth of a traditional, modest host. When the two families embraced, all differences in social class dissolved into mutual respect. The wedding was set for the upcoming winter. December arrived, bringing with it the classic, biting cold of Lahore. A thick blanket of white fog wrapped the city, but Aiza's home was warm, glowing with the lights of traditional pre-wedding festivities. The air was thick with the scent of marigolds, the rhythm of the dolak, and the joyful laughter of friends. Aiza, who used to spend her days in paint-stained jeans, sat adorned in a stunning yellow silk outfit, her hands beautifully detailed with intricate henna patterns. Her laugh possessed a radiant clarity, the kind that only comes when the soul knows it has safely arrived at its destination. The wedding day was magical. A historic hall on Mall Road was decorated with thousands of white jasmine flowers and warm, flickering candles. Harun, dressed in an elegant white sherwani and a traditional maroon turban, looked exceptionally handsome and poised. As he stood on the stage, his eyes fell upon Aiza, who was walking down the aisle in a breathtaking traditional red bridal gown. His heart hammered against his chest in the exact same frantic rhythm as it had during that first library reign. The marriage registrar asked the final, sacred question: "Do you, Aiza, daughter of Sikandar, accept Harun, son of Amjad, in holy matrimony?" Asterisk. With tears of gratitude in her eyes, Aiza replied clearly, "I do. I do. I do." Asterisk. The hall erupted into a chorus of congratulations and blessings. Sikandar Sahib stepped forward, embracing his daughter tightly, his tears validating that he had finally secured his daughter's true happiness. He then took Aiza's hand and placed it gently into Harun's palm. "My greatest treasure is now in your care," he whispered. The ceremony lacked any boastful, arrogant display of wealth, yet it possessed a profound richness, imbued with all the vibrant colors of Aiza's soul and the sacred, honest words of Harun's heart. You, me, and the unfinished tea. Conclusion. 2 years flew by. Life brought various changes, but the bond between Harun and Aiza only grew stronger and more resilient. They had moved into a charming, cozy apartment located close to Mall Road. One sunlit room of the apartment served as Aiza's art studio, filled with the beautiful chaos of canvases, easels, and scattered paintbrushes. The adjacent room was Harun's personal library, smelling richly of old paper, leather-bound books, and ink. Harun had risen to become a celebrated professor of Urdu literature, and his newly published academic book was receiving widespread acclaim from the nation's elite literary circles. Asa, too, had made a name for herself as an artist of international repute. Yet, for both of them, the ultimate definition of success remained unchanged, the peace they found when looking into each other's eyes. It was a late May evening, uncannily identical to the evening they had first met. Dark, heavy clouds hung low over Lahore, and a cool breeze swept through the streets, carrying the intoxicating, earthy scent of petrichor, promising a spectacular downpour. Harun finished his university grading, stepped out onto the balcony, and placed 2 steaming cups of hot cardamom tea on a small table. Asa emerged from her studio. Her hands bore faint smudges of blue and yellow paint, and her hair was tied up in a loose, messy bun. She walked over with a bright smile and took her seat opposite him. "It's going to rain heavily tonight, Harun," Asa said, looking up at the swirling gray sky. "Yes, it feels exactly like that fateful evening when a reckless young artist rushed into my library, desperately trying to save her sketchbook, and crashed my table," Harun reminisced, lifting his cup with a soft chuckle. Asa laughed, lifting her own cup. And an incredibly stiff, overly serious professor was hiding behind a massive book, stealing glances at me, and behaving so terribly hesitant to even lend me his paper cutter. Their shared laughter echoed beautifully in the quiet evening. Right then, the first heavy drop of rain splattered onto the balcony floor, followed by a gust of cool wind that brushed gently against their faces. "You know, Harun," Asa said, her tone softening into a deep, emotional seriousness as she took a sip of her tea, "people often say that once you attain love, life becomes mundane and ordinary. But I believe that when love finds its true home, it transforms into an eternal, divine peace. I no longer have to paint sadness to express my depth, because I am completely protected by your words." Harun reached across the small table and took her hand in his. His touch carried that exact same fierce warmth and safety that had melted her fears away years ago in Lawrence Garden. "Asa, our story began over a cup of unfinished tea, the tea we left behind at the old cafe because we became utterly lost in each other's words," Harun said, looking deeply into her eyes. "But that tea was left unfinished for a reason, so that the story of our lives could be completed. Now, as long as there is breath in my body, this tea, these colors, and our words will never be left unfinished again." Outside, the rain poured down in beautiful sheets, soaking the ancient trees of Mall Road. But on that small, warm balcony, the steam rising from their 2 teacups mingled together in the cool air, painting a masterpiece that was finally, flawlessly complete. They who were once profoundly lonely had become each other's entire universe. The colors had met their words, and the most beautiful masterpiece of creation was now living, breathing, and thriving between them.